Israel's war with Hamas resumes with airstrikes in Gaza after a week-long truce ends. DeSantis and Newsome lob insults and talk some policy in a face-off between two White House aspirants. Myanmar's military is losing ground against coordinated nationwide attacks, bowing opposition hopes. Today is Saturday, December 2nd, 2023, and this is the Dunkley Report. Israel's war with Hamas resumed after a week-long truce expired, with each side blaming the other for the resurgence of hostilities. Israeli airstrikes hit houses and buildings in the Gaza Strip, while militants in Gaza fired rockets into Israel. Health authorities in the besieged territory report dozens of Palestinians were killed Friday. Israel dropped leaflets over Gaza City and southern parts of the enclave, urging civilians to flee to avoid the fighting. The fighting threatens to compound the suffering in Gaza and has heightened concerns for hostages still held captive by Hamas and other militants. In an alternate reality, the primetime showdown between California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom and Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis could have been a preview of a 2024 general election debate. Instead, Thursday's 90-minute meeting was a hard-to-explain event that pitted one struggling Republican presidential hopeful against a Democratic rival who may or may not seek the presidency in 4 years. DeSantis called Newsom a slick, slippery politician whose state is failing. Newsom defended California and shifted the discussion to DeSantis's stagnant 2024 presidential bid. The governors were eager to represent their parties on the national stage as they battled over the economy, pandemic restrictions, and President Joe Biden's leadership, and traded personal insults. A major offensive against Myanmar's military-run government by an alliance of 3 militias of ethnic minorities has been moving at lightning speed, inspiring resistance forces around the country to attack. Myanmar's ruling military is falling back on almost every front, although commanders say they're regrouping and will regain the initiative. But hope is rising among opponents of military rule that this could be a turning point in the struggle to oust the army leaders who toppled democratically elected Aung San Suu Kyi almost 3 years ago. The militias say they share the same goal with other resistance forces, eliminating army rule. An annual report on capital punishment says more Americans now believe the death penalty is administered unfairly. The report says a Gallup poll from October that found 50% of Americans believe capital punishment is applied unfairly is another sign of the death penalty's further isolation in the U.S. The report by the Washington, D.C. based Death Penalty Information Center was released Friday. It says 2023 was the 9th consecutive year in which fewer than 30 people were executed and fewer than 50 people received death sentences. Experts say it remains uncertain if the public's waning support of the death penalty and its declining use will ultimately result in its abolition in the U.S. The death on Wednesday of former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has drawn admiration and scorn from political leaders around the world, highlighting the complicated legacy of Kissinger's views about what it meant to serve America's interests during the Cold War, and how the country should exert its influence Kissinger, who died Wednesday at 100, was one of America's most powerful diplomats. During his years serving under Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, he shaped the country's foreign policy in ways that led to breakthroughs. But his tenure also overlooked the rise of brutal regimes in other countries, and critics argue his approach left lasting damage throughout the world. The Republican National Committee's rules for next year's nominating contest and convention have been released, but a major question is unaddressed. Can delegates vote for a different candidate if the party's presumptive nominee is convicted of a felony? Former President Donald Trump is under 4 criminal indictments that will proceed through the GOP primary season. The RNC rules don't include any provisions specific to the unprecedented scenario unfolding. There are possible escape hatches in its rules and procedures if the party's leaders and activists have second thoughts by the time the convention rolls around. But it's highly unlikely there's enough political will to make the changes. The OPEC oil cartel and allied producers have made another big swipe at propping up lagging crude prices. The OPEC Plus oil ministers came out of an online meeting Thursday with more than 2 million barrels per day in voluntary cuts through the first 3 months of next year. They also declared that Brazil would join the bloc in January, bringing one of the world's fastest-growing oil producers into an alliance that is trying to rein in global supply. Sweeping cutbacks from OPEC Plus and individual member countries since October 2022 haven't made lasting changes to oil prices because of concerns about oversupply in a weakening global economy. That's a good thing for U.S. drivers who have been getting cheaper gas. Researchers have discovered that some penguin parents sleep for only seconds at a time around the clock to protect their eggs and chicks. Sensors were attached to adult chinstrap penguins in Antarctica for the research. The results published Thursday show that during the breeding season, the penguins nod off thousands of times each day, but only for about 4 seconds at a time. The parents need to stay vigilant to protect the chicks and nest sites from a large predatory bird and other penguins in the crowded colonies. The researchers say these mini catnaps appear to be enough to keep the parents going for weeks. Law enforcement authorities say in court papers that the plot, driven by a government official in India to assassinate a prominent Sikh separatist leader in New York City, was meant to precede another killing in California and more assassinations in the U.S. and Canada. An indictment unsealed. Wednesday in Manhattan federal court said the campaign to kill was interrupted when a man in India contacted a criminal associate who turned out to be a Drug Enforcement Administration informant to ask him to find a hitman. The indictment shows that urgency was key in the killing of a Canadian activist last June and the New York City plot. It took 8 years and the Notre Me Too movement to spur Sam Schultz to tell police they were sexually assaulted by an opera star and his husband. It took an additional 5 years for the attackers to plead guilty. Schultz has been saddled with worries from other gay men that talking about sexual abuse in their community will hurt the fight for LGBTQ+ rights. The pain of the assault, the public attention, and the court proceedings have taken a huge toll. A recent review of scientific literature says as many as 95% of male sexual violations go unreported. Many men said police were unsympathetic, and the process only added more trauma. Today's news was reported by the Associated Press. This has been the international news for Saturday, December 2nd, 2023. Thanks again for joining us here at the Dunkley Report.